Good evening, everyone. It's your girl, Marcy Thomas, and I am so excited to be back with you for another episode of Live Well, Sister. So please come on in the room, tell some friends, go ahead and share this out because the conversation that we are about to dive into is going to be very powerful and important for such a time as this. So I am coming to you from the outskirts of Atlanta, Georgia, originally from Cleveland, Ohio, and a whole bunch of other places in between. But I really like having this space so we can have some important conversations about a lot of different things. And tonight is going to be extra special. So our guest for today is Dr. Keisha N. Blain, who is a professor of history and Africana studies at Brown University. She is one of the most innovative and influential young historians of her generation. She is also a Guggenheim, Carnegie, and New America Fellow and a New York Times bestselling author. To date, she has published 8 books, many of which many of you have already read, but today we're here to talk about her latest book, Without Fear, Black Women and the Making of Human Rights, which was recently named as a 2026 Andre Carnegie Medal for Excellent Long List honoree. So without any further delay, because she's got so many great things to talk about, and I got lots of notes, I really want to get into the conversation with Dr. Blain. So without any further delay, let's welcome Dr. Keisha N. Blain to Live Well, Sister. Welcome, Dr. Blain.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, it's such an honor to have you here, a pleasure to have you here, and all of those good things. So first, I always like to give congratulations on the work because this baby is about a couple of months old now, right? Yes. And without brand spanking new, as they like to say. So it's a beautiful cover that we might talk about that a little bit. But Without Fear, Black Women and the Making of Human Rights. So first and foremost, what was it that really led you to want to write this particular book? Because you're talking about a lot of great women in history and rights and all those sorts of things. So what was it that led you to do Without Fear specifically?
Yes, well, so many things. I will admit that I tend to work on multiple projects at once. And it's simply the way my mind works. I like being able to grapple with a number of topics, many of them interconnected, but sometimes different topics. It just helps me stay, I think, fully engaged in the research since it's easy to get bored, as you can imagine, when you're working on these projects for a long time. So as it turns out, I started thinking about Without Fear and really pulling it together as I was in the process of finishing the book on Fannie Lou Hamer. So I was about to wrap up Until I Am Free. And as you know, this was a biography of Hamer. I was really trying to explain how her ideas are relevant in the current moment. And one of the things that caught my attention was a statement that Hamer expressed. And she said it multiple times in various ways. But essentially, she said that I've passed equal rights. I'm now seeking human rights. I'm now fighting for human rights. And I was struck by this, well, really the line. I was struck by what it meant to shift one's focus or one's analysis from this notion of equal rights, which is her way of really gesturing to what we talk about as citizenship rights, to a broader discussion of human rights, why she would say it, why it's significant, et cetera. So I started thinking a lot about that. And in so many ways, I think this book, Without Fear, is the answer to that question. As you know, because you've read it, I don't focus on Hamer in Without Fear, which was an intentional decision because I had already written a book on her. But I do think she looms large in the sense that we can see the way that her life, her thinking, right, is certainly in alignment here. And what becomes clear is that Black women have been thinking about human rights for a very long time. They've been thinking deeply about it. They've been at the center of human rights advocacy. They have been doing, I think, very innovative work. But much of the work has been, I think, largely hidden in the way that we tell human rights history. And that's something that I knew even at the time, just given really where I happened to be, and I'm talking about the physical space. So I was
Yeah.
finishing a book about Fannie Lou Hamer while a fellow at now called the Carl Ryan Center for Human Rights at the Harvard Kennedy School. And so I was surrounded by human rights thinkers and activists and practitioners and scholars, people who were all of the experts on human rights. And yet, as we were talking, just really in our day to day conversations or even in the presentations and the dialogue, it became clear to me that Black women were not at the center of many of the conversations. And I could tell that my particular perspective was one that was not widely known. And so I explained a lot
Yeah.
in many of these settings. And I knew that it would be important to write a book that would lay out the history very clearly and hopefully in a very compelling way.
Yeah.
So I think I've done that. I certainly hope that I have.
You definitely have. As I was saying to you before we came on, I personally felt good because there are a lot of names that you mentioned that I was already familiar with,
Mhm.
and then there were some that I wasn't. And you will get a chance to mention some of those people,
Mhm.
but it really this book really does mean a lot because it gives us just insight into Black women and how we've always had kind of a worldwide view,
Right.
understanding that many times, and we've all heard this say, hey, if Black women are cool, everybody's cool. So
Mhm.
there are women in our history who've always kind of understood that.
Yeah, no, this is such an important point. I will say, as I study history, and I've been doing this, working, I think, professionally as a historian now for 10 years. And one of the things that I always marvel at is that when we really pay attention to Black women's history, we see Black women uh, just in a myriad of ways, far beyond the general characterizations, which is to say, we certainly know about Black women in the context of the civil rights movement. We understand the role that Black women played. We talk about Black women as leaders, behind the scenes. Um, all of that is true. But I think despite really the rich scholarship, we have still only scratched the surface
Mm,
in really understanding the depth and richness of Black women's activism and ideas. And one of the things that I think Without Fear does, and it's certainly one of the goals of the book, is to show people that yes, it's true, Black women were activists, certainly, they were freedom fighters, they were doing many things, but they were also careful thinkers. They
mm,
were intellectuals. They were political strategists. And when I say that, I mean that, and they were doing it from a range of different places, but also I'm talking about Black women from diverse backgrounds. So this isn't a story about middle class and elite Black women being thinkers solely, but it's also about working class and working poor Black women as thinkers. People who, yes, have to fight to make ends meet, but they're also thinking about the world around them and trying to make a difference. And they are tapped into a larger dialogue that's I think significant on the national level, but
yes.
also at the global level. I mean, and that's the part that I just find remarkable, the way that Black women historically, and I think this is true even in the present day, are tapped into what's happening within their communities. They're certainly tapped into what's happening on the national level, and they are paying close attention to what's happening internationally, and they recognize the way that all of these challenges intersect, how they come together. They see the connections.
Mhm.
They are just very perceptive of the world in which they live. And to the larger point of the book, they're fighting for rights and they're fighting for protection and equality, all of these factors. And they're
Mhm.
not solely fighting for themselves, but
Right.
they're fighting for everyone else. And it truly is an inspirational story.
It definitely is, just to think about it. But I will tell you, just as a point of my learning, is a lot of times when people think of civil rights, human rights, they interchange the terms, and they are
Right.
in some ways they are, but then they're also different. So for those who might
Yes.
not really know what the difference is, could you give us a little bit of what
Yes.
the difference is?
Absolutely. So I think when we talk about citizenship, rights, really, and civil rights, we are talking about the relationship between the individual and clearly as citizen and the state or the nation state, or more specifically, the federal government.
Mhm.
And this is certainly the way that many activists were making demands for a range of things and saying, well, Black people need to be treated better because they are citizens of the United States.
Right.
And of course, when you think about the larger history of Black people in the United States, we understand the significance of making a claim to citizenship given the context and history of slavery in particular. And of course, we understand that under the institution of slavery, Black people were not even seen as people, but as
Exactly.
property, right? So it was important then to be able to argue forcefully and to be able to draw upon certainly the Constitution as an example to make a case that Black people are indeed part of the national polity and they should therefore have access to the vote, as just one example.
Mhm.
So that is certainly an important part of the history, and the shift to human rights is a different kind of argument. It's one in which we're really thinking about God-given rights or divinely inspired rights
Mhm.
and protections, which is to say that these or due to all of us simply because we are humans.
Right.
And they are not given by man. And to emphasize that point, regardless of where you fall on the religious spectrum, is to say
Mhm.
that these are higher rights that extend beyond the reach of a human, and therefore, in so many ways, um, you can't take it away. Obviously, we understand the complexities of everyday life and the ways in which one can make claims and not necessarily have their lives reflect the reality of those claims. But human rights is indeed emphasizing these, and I talk about in the book three core values. One, natural rights, right, to this idea that we all have certain protections because we are human, but also universal rights, that those rights should extend to all people, regardless of where they happen to be located, regardless of their background, etc. And then equal rights, that the rights should apply equally across the board. So some people should have more rights than others, right? Those kinds of things. And so human rights is a particular way of moving beyond the limits of the nation state and beyond the geographical borders of the United States, and saying really and truly, we have certain protections, and it doesn't matter if you see us as citizens or not. That's really not the question. Of course, we want to be recognized as citizens because we know we are citizens. But it's even, I think, a more urgent question and perhaps a higher demand, which is that actually you need to give us these rights because we are human, and every single person should have those rights. I won't get into the nitty gritty of it, but I certainly do talk about in the book that at the core of these ideals, I mean, these extend really to the age of enlightenment. We can trace back to the context of the French Revolution, and even in that context, and when you see a text like "The Rights of Man," which is a pamphlet that circulated in 1791, and this is Thomas Paine, who's a white man, right, who's essentially defending the French Revolution, and as I point out in the book, the people who are thinking about these ideas and pushing these ideals and saying, listen, we should have rights, we should have self-determination, we should have life and liberty and protection
Mhm.
and security, they were not thinking about Black people.
Mm-mm.
Certainly not. And so one of the, I think, powerful aspects of the book is being able to both show how these core ideals don't necessarily derive, right, or they don't emerge in a context in which Black people are included in the vision, but it doesn't stop Black people from indeed saying, well, wait a minute, we are in fact included in this vision, whether or not you think it. It's important to see that we matter too.
Absolutely.
And I guess to go back to the title of the book, we will make human rights our own, right? And so we will certainly emphasize these core tenets, and we will show you that it's important to make sure that all of these apply to us. And Black women do this, right,
Yes.
generation after generation, and you see the long history and the way that the movement, I think, really evolves with time. A lot changes by the time you get to the 20th century,
Mm-hmm.
but it is a truly powerful story about taking a hold of these core ideals and making them meaningful and using them as fuel for political activism at the grassroots level.
Yes, yes. And just reading through the book reminded me of a quote from Coretta Scott King: struggle is a never ending process. Freedom is never really won. You earn it and win it in every generation.
Mm-hmm.
And we see that play out throughout, this book, Without Fear. So in the very beginning, well, in the early part of the book, you
Mm-hmm.
start out by talking about some of the women who were involved in human rights at an
Mm-hmm.
early stage in American history, because this is focusing more so on
Right,
Black
right.
Americans. So just for anybody who's wondering, it's not the whole world, because that would be this thick. But we're focusing on what's happening here. But we see someone, a familiar name to many of us, Ida B. Wells Barnett. You kind of start out talking about her. We know that she did a lot in terms of lynching, and
Mm-hmm.
and right, as a journalist, as a speaker, and a lot of other things. But what people may not know is that she was also doing some things internationally in that regard.
Yes, absolutely. And that's one of the things that I wanted to do in this book, and I'm really glad that I was able to, which is a combination of really talking about. I certainly talk about new women, women who I learned about for the first time in the process of doing the research,
Mm-hmm.
and so many women who will be new to a reader, but placing them in conversation with others who are well known, yet presenting those well known figures in a new light. And so to the point of Ida B. Wells, I've studied Ida B. Wells, and I know you certainly know about Ida B. Wells, very well known figure. But much of what I think we all know about Ida B. Wells is the fact that she was this fierce anti lynching crusader. We certainly know her influence and significance in terms of journalism, and we think about the Red Record as just one of many of her important contributions. I was struck by the fact that as I returned to Ida B. Wells in the process of writing this book, I realized that it was important to situate her as someone who was thinking deeply about human rights and also involved in human rights advocacy. And to be more specific, as you emphasize, she not only traveled internationally to talk about lynchings, and so in the late 1890s, in the 1890s and late 19th century, she traveled to the UK, and I talk about how she's going to churches, for example, to a range of different organizations, and she's speaking about the horrors of lynching and trying to get Europeans to essentially understand that this is an evil practice that must come to an end. So she is involved in that dialogue. But one of the things that she's also doing is she is making the case that
Yes.
lynching is wrong, not solely because it is a violation of civil rights and citizenship rights, but because it is in fact a violation of human rights. And to be clear, she's making this argument at a time where we don't have the formal right human rights organizations or even the human rights laws that we're able to call upon, which is how I discuss these women as essentially human rights couriers, which is to say that they are bringing forth this idea at a moment where there are no formal structures in place. So they're creating something new, they're pushing it forward. That's the one part of Ida B. Wells' story. And the second part of her story is when you look at her writings and her speeches with a careful eye, it becomes clear that she is making a case for human rights. So just to give a practical example, there's a moment in which she talks about the horrors of lynching, and she draws parallels to what's happening in Cuba, for example. So she's making a case that we need to understand the horrors of lynching alongside of American imperialist ventures, right? And it's a way of showing us the way she's thinking globally and drawing these connections. There's another moment where she says the lynchings that we see taking place in the United States are akin to human rights abuses that are happening across the
Mm-hmm.
world. She references the Armenian genocide as one example. I was struck by that. I was struck by the framing of the argument because a lot of what I understood about her was her constantly appealing to the federal government, saying you need to
Right.
protect Black people, right? We are citizens. She is doing that, but she's doing other things too. And I wanted to emphasize the international aspect, the human rights advocacy, and in particular the way that she is shaming the United States on a
Right.
global scale and saying, right, look what you're doing. You're supposed to be this beacon of democracy, and you're trying to present this image to the rest of the world. Yet, not only are you depriving Black people of citizenship rights, I mean, that's bad enough. But as it turns out, you're not even you're not even civil in the broadest sense, because you're not even extending human rights. You're not recognizing the
Right.
rights that all of us should have simply because we are human. And that shows that you are, in fact, quite backwards. And I sort of reflect on that, because she understands that if nothing else, U.S. leaders don't want to be seen as backwards, right? I mean, this
Right.
is a phrase they would certainly use to describe other people, not
Right.
themselves. And so,
Exactly.
yeah, and so there's a power here, I think, when we think about language. And so I pay a lot of attention to the words these women use, to my earlier point of them as political strategists, as thinkers. It's not just kind of haphazard, like, and granted, political advocacy in and of itself and political activism, I mean, it's a powerful thing to do. But it's something to not only advocate, but also to just be thinking at every level, to really sit with the, whatever it is you're grappling with, and trying to come up with arguments that will be compelling to convince, right, the person that you're trying to sway. And it's yes, you may tug at hearts.
Mm.
That certainly is, we see that in the context, right, of
Right.
many movements. You can tug at hearts, but here it's also, I think, you might say, tugging at minds and saying, well, wait a minute, let's grapple with this.
Hmm.
You say you believe in these rights. Okay, so now let's talk about why you won't ensure that these rights apply to right, people of African descent.
Hmm.
And obviously we understand the role of racism and white supremacy. She's in
Yes.
Ida Wells, she's not oblivious to it.
Right.
She
Right.
gets it, right? She understands why people are kind of looking the other way, but it doesn't stop her from pointing it out, and laying it bare, so that we see the hypocrisy right before us. We see the double standard,
Hmm.
and then we begin to question, right, is the United States really a leader in any kind of global discourse, when in fact they can't even get this right? And so she is certainly in many ways, I think, ahead of her time. And as I point out in the
Yes.
book, people don't necessarily listen, right? So she's persuasive, she's skillful, she's sharp. All of that is true. And people don't necessarily listen. But what she does is she helps to lay a foundation on which other generations are able to build. So it's not useless at all. It's
Not at all.
powerful, and it really, I think, sets the stage. And of course, as you know, I place her in conversation with other Black women, Mariah Stewart in the 1830s, and I even go back as far as discussing Elizabeth Freeman, in the 18th century, who's filing a lawsuit, and then turns out to be successful in court, and again demanding rights and the recognition of rights. So Black women have been at this for such a long
A
time.
long time. Yes. Elizabeth Freeman. You say Mariah
Yeah.
Stewart, Jarena Lee, all of
Yes.
those, and
Yes.
others. These are just some, as I said earlier, I was glad that I kind of knew those names, so I'm
Hmm.
not too far out of the loop. But what I really like is the context in which
Right.
the stories are told or their information is shared, because it's one thing to, maybe hear a name and read like a one-off,
Yeah.
synopsis of their life or whatever. But when you look at it in the context of other people who were doing similar things at the same time, that makes a difference. So I do have a comment. Jean is saying, Ida B. Wells Barnett, my role
Mhm.
model as a professional writer and literary activist.
Yeah.
Yes, yes, she definitely is. And actually, she's kind of far back, but she's right there over my shoulder. That's
Oh.
all I needed. I kind of
Yes.
just right
Yes.
there. So I'm sure she
Yeah.
likes that we're talking about her.
Yeah, and I like the fact that you emphasize that these women are really in conversation with each other, and I think it's, I would emphasize in community with each other. That's the one part of the book that really moved me.
Mhm.
Um, it's we all have certain gifts. I mean, we all have individual gifts and abilities, and there's a lot we could do as individuals, to be sure. but there's something so powerful about being able to team up with someone else or to tap into certain communities. And so, even in the case of Ida B. Wells, you see her working with a range of organizations, working
Mm-hmm.
with a range of activists, diverse activists. Of course, we know, she had a close relationship with someone like Frederick Douglass. As one example, she's involved in NAACP. Of course, she's instrumental to the founding of the organization, and she's in all of these spaces. I talk about her even in the context of the Black Women's Club movement. And as the book progresses, I talk about sororities, I
Yes.
talk about churches. I just and as you pay attention to these women's lives, we see individuals who are very powerful in their own right, but they don't work alone.
Right.
They are part of communities or in conversation with other people. They're strategizing collectively, so it's both the power of the individual and also the collective. And I think that is something to reflect on, especially as we think about this current moment and all that we're grappling with. We have to be able to, quite frankly, we can't survive this moment. I'll say it that way. Alone, we just can't. We have to work with each other. We have to be part of communities. And I encourage everyone to make sure they are tapped into a range of communities to meet a number of needs, whether we're talking about religious, political, a combination of both. But we see these women doing that, and I think it helps significantly to keep the work not only manageable, but it keeps, I think, their vision alive and just moving in powerful directions because they are not simply working in isolation.
Right, right. And I'm not gonna go necessarily in the order of the book because you just brought up two things that I
Yeah.
had on my notes. One is which just the whole idea of the Black Women's Club movement. And there are
Hmm.
so many different clubs that were formed for a lot of different reasons, some of which
Yeah.
are still in existence
Yes.
today, others which might have, had been shorter term, for
Hmm.
a specific purpose. But that whole aspect of community really is large, or huge, looms large, I should say,
Yes.
because it
Yes.
is the thing of us being able to come together. Because, yes, I might be good at one thing, someone else is good at something else. I might have, certain, what should I say, be able to go into certain rooms that
Hmm.
maybe somebody else can't go into, and we just all kind of come together and support one another. And so I really think that that's powerful to think that, yes, because remember in the early stages of this book, we're talking about like the late 19th century, the early
Right.
20th
Right.
century, where a lot of these things are happening. So all of these women are coming together and doing, using their voices, whether it's through speaking or through writing, they're doing all of this
Hmm.
at a time where it's really not even, it's not safe. Well, shoot, it's not
Yeah.
still not safe in 2025.
Right. Right.
But it definitely
Absolutely.
isn't then.
Hmm. Yes, and even was as you were talking, I was also thinking about the short-lived groups that were formed, and I pay attention to those too.
Mm,
I'm thinking about, of course, in the case of Madam C.J. Walker, the International League for Darker Peoples, or ILDP, that I discussed really only in existence in 1919, which is a pivotal year for many reasons that I could talk about. And then I also talk about later in the book the Sojourners for Truth and Justice. That's also short lived, exists from about 1951 to 52. And I intentionally include these groups because, one, they're lesser known, but also I'm trying to signal to others, to readers, the power of these spaces, even when they are short lived. In the case of the ILDP, what's very clear is that even though they don't have this long life as a group, when they do come together, they ultimately come to represent, I think, just the power of Black transnational organizing.
mhm.
They are trying to connect with the Japanese delegates who are traveling to the Paris Peace Conference because they're thinking about multiple things. Certainly, Afro-Asian solidarity, that's an interesting theme that I emphasize in the book.
Yes, it
But
is.
also, yeah, which to I will admit, it just happens to be a topic I'm grappling with for other projects. So it all came together in a lovely way. Um, and so to my point, the organization is short lived, but it's this. I think I talk about it as this powerful moment where all these people come together. We're talking about someone like A. Philip Randolph and Marcus Garvey and others, and just and of course the important figure who I emphasize here, Madam C.J. Walker, and what they're trying to do is be in dialogue, certainly, but they're trying to shape the conversation when they are shut out of the formal political process, which is to say they're not allowed in, right? They don't have an opportunity to actually speak at the Paris Peace Conference. So what they try to do is essentially rely on the Japanese delegates as sort of proxy to speak on behalf of people of African descent in order to advocate for this racial equality clause. And I discuss the intricacies of that in the book. And that's just such an interesting moment. And it's one in which we see the creativity, the political creativity and strategy of Black women, certainly of Black people broadly, recognizing that even when you don't have a seat at the table, you could still affect change. And there
Right.
are so many ways to do it. And that's just one pivotal way. And it does lay the groundwork. And as I move forward in the book, we were able to see other women do similar things at different moments, in which they're building on the legacy and they're building on the work of Madam C.J. Walker and others. So it is both. So both the large organizations, the ones that have a very long life, like the NAACP, the National Council of Negro Women, and all of these very important groups that have just been around for quite some time, and then placing them alongside others that are lesser known, but no less impactful in their moment. And so I think all of that helps to show the complexity of the history.
Yes, definitely showing the complexity. Yeah, Madam CJ's back there too. I don't know which side she's on. Yeah, when they have
Right.
those really nice dolls that are talking about our history, I grab them.
Hmm.
But one thing about her, before I ask the second part of the question I was going to bring up, is that she was a woman who had a lot to lose, and you talk a little bit about
Yes.
that.
Yes.
By she is Madam CJ Walker. She's making a lot of money. She's has this business, but she's not a person that's afraid to speak up and speak out. And there are other people who are famous that you talk about in the book as well. People who are in the entertainment industry or whatever, who may have something to lose by being a person that speaks up or out about what's right or what's wrong. And it's just interesting the juxtaposition of that
Yes.
and what we see nowadays, where certain people might speak up, and things are happening because they're speaking up, or maybe other people aren't saying things about what's happening in the world because they know that it's a big risk. So I enjoyed
Yes.
being able to read that about Madam CJ Walker,
Hmm.
and also understand that there were people in her ears saying maybe you shouldn't. you know so
Yes. Yes, and this is something I will say I was intentional about including these aspects of these women's lives. Of course, I knew that I wanted to talk about ideas and I wanted to talk about politics and political lives. Um, but I also, I think, took the time to grapple with personal lives as a
mhm.
way to signal, um, one, the way the two are intertwined,
Yes.
but also, I wanted readers to understand that, yes, these women were powerful and fearless, but they're also grappling with very real human challenges,
Mhm.
um, such as Margaret Cartwright at one moment reflecting on the difficulties of juggling her life, of knowing that she's deeply invested in human rights advocacy. And she's also trying to balance, being a wife and also being a professor, and like she's wearing all of these hats. And there's a moment where you can sense the frustration as she is right juggling so many things.
Mhm.
And in the case of Madam C.J. Walker, she knows what she wants to do. She is very clear about where not only her heart is, but really I think where her political commitments lie. She is deeply invested and not only improving conditions for Black people, but she's interested in improving conditions for all people of color. I talk about her traveling
Mm,
throughout Central America. I talk about her visiting, going to the Caribbean, in particular, going to Haiti, visiting prisoners, talking to political prisoners, and just she's someone who's I think just had a heart for anyone in need, uh,
yes.
and and yet she was also dealing with the reality that she was under great scrutiny. It's
Mm,
not easy being the first of anything, and she's famous and she's rich, and people are paying attention to everything that she does and everything that she says. And to your point, close advisors saying, "Wait a minute." You
right.
don't want to be hanging out with these radicals. You don't want to be involved in these kinds of things. You could lose your empire. You could lose it all. And you've worked so hard, and she struggled with that. She grappled with it because she didn't want to lose it all. She had worked really hard. She struggled, had such a hard life, and but knew it was important to be involved in these efforts. So we see the tug of war, even in the story that I tell. The moment that she's all in, and then the moment when she steps out of it, and then the moment where she's quietly giving the money, supporting behind the scenes
Right.
because she can't let it go. Um, and in a way, it just reflects, I think, our own lives. The times where we do want to speak up, we feel compelled to speak up, and it's,
Hmm.
sadly, it's a choice. Do you speak up? You know it's right to do so, but in
Mm,
doing so, you may lose your job tomorrow, and you're also thinking, but I have kids to feed, and I have other commitments, and I don't want to lose the ability to take care of my family, right, for this one statement, but I need to make that one statement. So
right.
it's a human thing, and certainly it is a concern that we're dealing with, I think, in this very moment. So
Absolutely.
so as people read the book, I think they will really resonate. I mean, I think these stories will resonate, and they can understand these women, and hopefully see them in really in a new light and appreciate what they're doing.
Hmm. Hmm. The other thing I wanted to bring up, because it's in alignment with the Black Women's Clubs, because
Hmm.
you did mention um, sororities, American Council on
Yes.
Human Rights, and I am in a sorority. Actually, it's
Okay.
Rovember, Sigma Gamma Rho.
Nice. Yeah.
So I love seeing that we were a part of this, but it just made me think. We know that there are certain things that the sororities have done in terms of like civil rights and things like
Yes.
that over the
Yes.
time, but looking at the fact that they came together to work on human rights, I found that
Yes.
pretty powerful that they were able to do
Yes.
that. And again, not necessarily for years and years and years. It doesn't still exist today, but there was a time when they were working together on that, and I just found that
Yeah.
powerful.
Well, it's interesting because I was talking to someone recently, as I've been traveling for the book tour. So I'm forgetting who exactly said this to me, but someone came up to me, and I want to say they were part of the AKAs, and they said, "Oh, um, we still go to to the United Nations every year or something." And I thought, okay, yeah, no, that makes sense. And they were like telling me how there's like UN Day or something, and I'm blanking on the specifics. But as they were talking, I said, all of that makes sense. All of that makes sense. Just given the history, what we see quite clearly is that sororities, of course, Black sororities in particular, provide a space for Black women to advocate,
Mm,
not only for the expanded rights in the context of the nation, but also to think about other people who are struggling and across the world. We see that, and in the book, I talk about sororities coming together in the aftermath of Italy's invasion of Ethiopia. So we're talking about 1935, very early, and trying
right.
to come up with strategies like how do we respond, how do we help
Mm,
Ethiopians in their time of need, and what can we send, and so it's a powerful story about people recognizing that it's not just about like your concerns and your space and your community. You can't dismiss those things, but it's also realizing that there is still room, there's space to care about other people too.
yes.
And these women show that. And the other quick thing I would say too, part of what I'm arguing in the book is that, which I think becomes quite clear, is that Black women were at the center, at the forefront of human rights advocacy long before there were um, quote unquote human rights organizations.
Right.
And I think that is an important point of the story, is to say, you know, the United Nations is significant to be sure, but Black women didn't need the United Nations, quite
Right.
frankly. They used the sororities to do what they needed to do, as one example. And when the United Nations certainly came to fruition, then they knew this was another avenue they could work through, but they didn't wait for it, and they still don't wait. They still don't rely solely on the United Nations. So it is a powerful story about just using what you have access to, using whatever is at your disposal to make sure that you can still advance the causes that are important to you.
Hmm. That is so powerful, and we still see the power
Yeah.
of the organizations, even though there's a lot of hubbub that's going on. We know things that people are
Right.
saying when they don't really understand, you know
Hmm.
what what those organizations are all about. But I love just seeing that and seeing us be able to work together, and also really recognizing that we are global citizens, Black
Right.
women as global citizens. Because as you know, we mentioned earlier on about Ida B. Wells traveling to have conversations, with people. A lot of these other women
Hmm.
had time opportunities to travel and be in the spaces where they could, have the ear of certain people to have the conversation. So it's not just
Yeah.
about what's happening here, but it's what's happening globally.
Yes, yes. And as you were talking, it made me think about Pearl Sherrod, who I love talking about simply because this is someone who didn't have a lot of resources. I talk about the context of her life as a working class Black woman living in Detroit, and I only have record of her making this one trip. And it's not too far away, but it counts, right? And it's a trip to Vancouver.
Yes.
And so she travels from Detroit to Vancouver, Canada, and she essentially goes to this gathering. It's the Pan Pacific Women's Association, their annual meeting. They have these gatherings, and she showed up in 1937, and she was not invited, but she walked to the front, goes to the podium, and she essentially calls these women out. This is a room of mostly white and Asian women. She calls them out and says to them, "You cannot imagine," and of course I'm paraphrasing, but you cannot imagine that you are able to advance peace and unity and equality if you are not going to consider the plight of Black people, right?
Right.
She is clear that Black women are not in this space, and
Hmm.
she's saying this is a problem.
Hmm.
And and it's such a powerful scene, but it's a moving scene in which it's captured in the way people talk about it. People are shocked that this Black woman just shows up and essentially crashes the party, but they are moved. They listen to her, and what happens, as I talk about in the book, is once they are convicted in that way, they make a decision to open up the space to Black women, and so they in the following years they open up, they extend invitations to Black women to come to the gatherings. And so it's a small change at the grassroots level, but it just shows the power of one individual to be able to stand up and say, okay, this is not right. The human rights, right, cannot mean just white people or just
Right.
people of Asian descent. Like, what's happening here? If it's going to be about the human, then hello, then it should apply
Right.
broadly. Exactly, exactly. And again, this is 1937, at a time where Black women are still, Black people broadly are still fighting to have full access, right, to the
Mhm.
vote. And so it is important to understand just the multiple layers of the struggle, if you will, that they are trying to be recognized in one context, but needing to also make a case in a larger context. And to your point of travel, the ability to just make that one trip
Mhm.
is such an important moment for Pearl Sherrod, and it is significant. I think I intentionally include it because she doesn't have the ability to make as many trips as others who I discussed. Margaret Cartwright, who I mentioned, who's a professor who's traveling extensively. She has a
Mhm.
number of people and agencies and funding her travels, so she can do a lot of things. Pearl Sherrod just has this one trip that she's able to make, but it's just as significant. And to place those two in the same book, I think, helps to signal that you do whatever you can with what
Do
you
what you
have. Yeah,
can. Yeah, do what you can with what you have.
yeah,
That is so important and powerful. Now, there are a lot of other people that we mentioned that are mentioned in the book that we just cannot get into all of
yeah.
them because I have to be
A
respectful
lot.
of
Yeah,
Dr. Blaine's time. And plus, the whole point is for you to get the book and really
yeah.
read it and let things resonate with you. But I do want to mention these couple of people
Hmm.
because they are artists that we may be aware of. One for sure, Lena Horne,
Yes.
mentioned and some of the work that she was doing, and you also mentioned Bea Richards in the book,
Yeah.
who were also these are famous people
Yeah.
that you've
Yeah.
seen in films, television, plays, whatever the case may be, but that they, like a Madam C.J. Walker, are like people that people know, but they're speaking up and they're speaking out.
Absolutely. And so, to the case of Lena Horne, I mentioned earlier that there were women, of course, who I learned about in the process of doing the research, and then there are other women who I knew about, but didn't know, um, I think, the totality of their lives. And so Lena Horne is an example. I was in the process of looking for something, and I'm forgetting what exactly, but I remember I was searching through newspapers, trying to find some information, and I just happened to come across reference to a column by Lena Horne. I remember thinking, wait, Lena Horne has a column?
Right.
What exactly? So, of course, that led me down a rabbit hole. And then I spent the next 3 days pulling, finding every single thing that she wrote and reading intently. And I was stunned. I thought, okay, now this is a Lena Horne that I have not encountered before. As I talk about in the book, in her performances, and there's a way in which, of course, even songs and so on, she's grappling with a number of themes of,
Mhm.
like, love and heartbreak, all of these things. But when we get to her writings, we see a very clear political aspect of her life. We see her commitment to human rights advocacy, her global racial consciousness, as all of these things come to the rise to the surface. And then, as I started reading more and more about her life, it becomes clear that she is deeply committed to human rights, and she's advocating even in Hollywood, right behind the scenes. She's trying to make sure that Black actors and actresses have greater access, and she's trying to challenge the kind of stereotypical um, roles. And so she's doing all of that, and then she writes this column in the People's Voice, in which I think, and I talk about it as a space in which she can say exactly what she thinks
Mhm.
without any kind of fear, without any limitation. She grapples with topics that she's not able to grapple with in song, right?
Right.
And so, it is quite remarkable. And so I matched that with a couple of speeches that I was able to find that she gave, in which she spoke about these topics. And I saw the threads, the connections between what she's saying and what Ida B. Wells said in the 19th
Right.
century. And it's such a remarkable story. And so, to your point, seeing someone with fame, and right, and someone who's wealthy and famous, um, use their platform uh, at a moment where it was quite dangerous, right? As you were referencing earlier, in the context of the 1940s, thinking about World War II era, and just an array of challenges in that moment, government surveillance, I mean, repression of all kinds,
Mhm.
and for her to be able to, in that moment, uh, say what she said, it is truly remarkable, and I think it's important to emphasize those aspects, right, of Black women's lives, and so I do. I love being able to delve into her writing, since it's simply not the way we generally talk about Lena Horne.
Right, because I mean, many of us have seen pictures of her at the March on Washington or something like that.
Yeah,
And we
yeah,
think, oh, okay, she just popped up at the
right,
March on
right.
Washington, maybe not understanding that she has been involved in movement
Yes,
and human
yeah,
rights, civil rights for a long
long
time. That
time.
she didn't just pop up, just as a little.
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah, exactly, exactly. It really is. To that point, a story about the longevity, and uh, she reminds me of even someone like Mary Church Terrell, who just she pops up in the book, right, and almost every chapter, because she lives a long life, but also she keeps at it. She's in an array of organizations. She's traveling to Switzerland in 1919. She's talking about human rights in that context. I discussed the fact that she gives this powerful speech, and she in 1919, in which it essentially, and it pretty much um, lays the groundwork for what I talk about later in the context of the 1948 Declaration for human rights. And I sort of course, I reflect on the fact that when we when we read mainstream human rights history, Mary Church Terrell simply do not show up.
Mm-hmm.
But what I show is that what 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 we ultimately discuss in the context of the 1940s, Black women have been thinking about for decades prior, talking
Mm-hmm.
about, writing about, um, and boldly advocating, right, in a range of different places and spaces. And if you see it through that light, you realize, okay, so this is not novel. And so, yes, I talk about Mary McLeod Bethune and being
Yes.
at the founding meeting for the United Nations. That is significant, certainly. But to be able to just look back and say, okay, so she's building upon this long legacy and this history of Black women. Um, that is I think the part of the story that's also surprising, but so important to tell.
Yes, it definitely is. And no, again, we can only talk about bits and pieces
Yeah.
of it because there's just the history is so rich. And Dr. Blain, I thank you for writing this book and just really bringing some things, reminding me of the things that I knew, but then also expanding my knowledge just, based upon the ways in which you share the stories or tell this history. One last thing I want to just bring up is the fact of using our voices, specifically
Hmm.
the speaking and the writing. Black journalism, Black, newspapers, like you talk about Freedom Ways Journal at some point. They were just so Women's Era magazine. These are all things that you mentioned in the book where Black women were using the power, not just speaking, but using the power of the pen and
Yes.
just how
Yes.
important those spaces for them to be able to talk about what was going on and just thinking of that in juxtaposition to what's happening now where voices are being silenced.
Hmm.
So it was just so powerful to see that and just really thinking about how can we in this day and age when there are things that need to be talked about and things that need to be worked on, how can we tap into the spirit of being able to share our own thoughts and feelings.
Yeah, that's so important. And even in the few examples you just gave, it really to the women's era and also the freedom ways, it emphasizes just the importance of creating our own spaces. Um, which is to say that, yes, many of the women who I write about did contribute to an array of newspapers, right? Mainstream newspapers, certainly prominent Black newspapers. But then there were others who created their own newspapers, right? Their own spaces in which to share their ideas. And I think that is important too. Granted, there are so many challenges to doing that. I'm not suggesting that it's easy to establish a newspaper or anything like that. But what is my point is that especially in this time where we have access to social media, where we have access to an array of platforms,
Mm-hmm.
such as this, right? Just this is a powerful example of a modern day space that you created in which to make sure that your voice isn't silent, and that the voices of others who are doing this important work are not silenced. And so that in and of itself is such an important thing to emphasize. And I think in a similar way, that's what these Black women were doing. They were using the spaces that they could find to use, but they were also creating spaces to ensure that they would be able to continue the work that's important to them. And I think there is a lot for us to learn from these examples, and I certainly hope that people find inspiration in the book. And
Absolutely.
yeah, I know you referenced the title earlier, but I'll say it comes from Mary McLeod Bethune, in which she is telling Black women in 1944, like, we can do this work, we have to do it, and we have to do it without fear and hesitancy.
Mm-hmm. Without fear and hesitancy. And this is, y'all, this is such a good book. It is available on audio as well, because I did a little bit of both. Just because sometimes time is what it is. So I'm like, I had a doctor's appointment today and I'm sitting there and I'm listening. They're calling my name, like, oops, I gotta go.
Yes, yes.
I just wanted to mention this cover though. I think that's such a beautiful cover of the book.
Yes, yeah. So this is a beautiful portrait by Elizabeth Catlett. I actually
okay. I
had
never
not, yeah. So I never, I will say I had never seen it until it was shared with me. So I think many people, I'm pretty certain many people are familiar with her work, especially if you look her up and you see the beautiful portraits. For sure, you will recognize them. But this is just a very talented um, American and Mexican sculptor, an artist who I think just depicted Black Americans quite powerfully. And so this cover is coming from one of her pieces that's not as well known, but that's now I think it'll be more well known. So I'm grateful for that.
I don't know why I didn't make the connection, but yeah, it definitely is her style.
Yes, her style, absolutely.
It definitely is. Once you said it, I was like, oh, yeah, I know.
Yeah.
So yes, I mean, even that, just the cover art is something someone you may or may not be familiar with.
Right, right.
Yes, Elizabeth Catlett. So I love that. Thank you for sharing that. Now I do know that the book baby is still relatively new. So you are making your way around the world talking about the book. Are there any potential spaces that will be in the weeks ahead that people can come out and see you and get a chance to converse with you and maybe get a signing or whatever?
Yes. And so I do have an upcoming talk on next Monday, which I believe is the 10th.
Yes.
And so I'll be in conversation with Beverly Guy Sheftel in Atlanta. This is being hosted by Charisse. I think it's Charisse Books, if my memory is correct. And this is going to be at the Auburn Avenue Research Library. So I do encourage those in Atlanta, if you can come, stop by. I'm blanking on the exact time, but I'm sure you can find the information online.
I'm thinking it's probably 7. That's when they usually do stuff.
Okay, that makes sense.
That's local for me, but unfortunately I won't be able to come see you. But that is, yes, normally it's about 7.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. I do. This has been really wonderful to talk about the book. And
thank you. I have enjoyed talking to you as well. I'm just doing a last look. I think I hit all the highlights. I hit all the highlights. So,
yes.
So, and I just wanted to say real quickly, though, for those who are in the Atlanta area, or if you plan to come to the Atlanta area, there actually is the National Center for Civil and Human Rights here in Atlanta. They have been renovating it, and it actually reopens this Saturday, which is November the 8th, if you're watching in real time. So if you're ever in the Atlanta area, please go and check that out, because I'm sure a lot of these people that Dr. Blain talks about in her book will be featured there. I'm actually going to be doing some things with them. So I will make sure I tap into the people that you talk about first when I go over there and to do some things with them. So thank you again for being here. Don't you hang up just yet, but I'll see you in just a second, and I will give a couple of announcements. So thank you again, Dr. Blain. I really do appreciate you giving of your time and your brilliance. So
thank you for having me.
You're welcome. All righty. So yes, that was such a wonderful conversation. I enjoyed having a chance to read Dr. Blain's book. She has so many others out as well. So please follow her, look her up, stay in touch, because she's all about telling our stories and, encouraging us through our stories and really giving us food for thought and an opportunity to learn about some of our great sheroes and heroes. So if you don't have a copy of Without Fear, it is available at the Brown Girl Collective bookstore, which is just that, Brown Girl Collective bookstore.com. If you go there, you will see it. It's one of the first books that you'll see there, since this is our current conversation. But just by means of announcement, on Monday, which is the 10th, I will be talking to Lauren Morrow about her book, Little Movements. That's fiction. So we'll be talking to her about that book. A week from today, I have Jody Ann Burry, who will be here to talk about Authentic, which is the myth of bringing your full self to work. So that should be very interesting. And then on the 17th, Sky Full of Love with Lorna Lewis. So that's also a fiction book. And just so you know, these are just the ones I'm sharing. There's a couple other surprises betwixt and between, and other things that will be happening later in the month and also going into December. It's packed, y'all. I got some really good folks coming to be in this space with us. So I look forward to seeing you here. Again, thank you to Dr. Blain for being here, and to everyone else. I look forward to seeing you real soon, and continue to live well. Take good care. Bye-bye.